How's it going, guys? Miguel here from CFS Recovery. On this channel, I teach people how to recover from CFS or chronic fatigue syndrome or any hypersensitive nervous system disorder. So everything I say in this video, I just want to make it clear right off the bat. This is my personal opinion. This is not medical advice. I'm not a trained professional. I'm not a doctor. This is all based on my experience. And if you don't know my story, I'm currently 27 years old. From the ages of 19 to 24, I suffered with dozens and dozens of strange symptoms: fatigue, brain fog, chronic pain, buzzing, tingling, vertigo, POTS symptoms, high heart rate, heart palpitations, a lot of really weird neurological symptoms. And at my worst, I was completely bedridden, right? I was in the hospital. I was living with my grandparents, could not get out of bed, could not function, definitely couldn't leave the house. I needed help just going to the washroom. I just seemed to be getting worse and worse. I had no idea what was going on. I ended up actually in the hospital in intensive care unit for about a month, where they did all these tests. They did all these scans. They could not find anything. And over those 4.5 years, I had seen dozens of doctors and specialists, and I did every test in the books and nothing was showing up on my tests. All of them were negative. So I felt like I was going crazy. Eventually, like I said, I continued to get worse. Was bedridden at my grandparents' place, continued to decline, then ended up in the hospital for about a month. But luckily, I met a doctor there who showed me exactly how to fix my hypersensitive nervous system issue. And a few years after that, I recovered to the point where I was running about 10 kilometers a week. I was working out pretty intensely, about 3 to 4 times a week. I was boxing. I was able to travel, hang out with friends, do all the things that I used to do even before I got sick, if not do more things now. So I was also able to build a video production company, and eventually that led to me starting this YouTube channel where I wanted to help more people who have gone through what I went through. Currently, I help people recover from this illness and just pretty much get their life back, because it can be very debilitating. Essentially, what CFS is, or chronic fatigue syndrome, there's different labels for this hypersensitive nervous system disorder. Essentially, that's what it is. It's a hypersensitive nervous system issue, and all these symptoms are ways your brain places limiters on the body. And there have been lots of people who've been reaching out to me who have been experiencing long COVID. They had COVID, then they recovered, but they never quite came out of it, and they're left with a bunch of strange neurological symptoms. Shout out to Junior, who's in the Recovery Jumpstart program, for sending me this video. I'm going to be doing a live reaction to this video right here because I've heard that long COVID can be very similar to CFS. So let's have a listen to this video. This video is from the Science magazine. They have a very reputable channel, 291,000 subscribers. This video came out on April 15th, 2022. So just about 2 months ago, and it already has almost 500,000 views. So let's take a look at it and see if any of these tie into kind of my understanding of chronic fatigue syndrome.
We did anticipate that there will be neurological complications right from the very beginning. I've been studying viruses since the 80s when the AIDS pandemic started, and it was the same story there too. A lot of people have long-term cognitive problems, even if their virus is well under control. What affects the brain can be extremely devastating because it can affect your personality, your ability to think and concentrate, your mood, and those things that make us a person as a whole.
So that is something very common that I see with people who come to me for help. They have a lot of brain fog, a lot of cognitive function tends to go out the window. You can't think straight. Short-term memory, you get memory loss. You could be talking to someone and mid-sentence you forget what you're saying and it doesn't really make any sense, or it comes out as slurred speech. And then people tend to kind of lose their personality, because when you can't really express what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and this is just one of the many symptoms, then you do start to lose your personality, and you can have lower mood with CFS. You can be depressed and anxious because you do, in a sense, lose a part of yourself. So very interesting. I'm already seeing lots of kind of similarities, but we'll keep watching.
When SARS-CoV-2 emerged, many were initially focused on its impact to the lungs. It soon became apparent that COVID takes a toll on the entire body, from the gastrointestinal tract to the brain. Autopsies have revealed devastating damage in the brains of those who have died from COVID.
If you have had COVID or currently have it, make sure to get all the testing done, because, this is where there's a fine line between having long COVID and having something like just a nervous system issue. If you have things that are left over from COVID, make sure you get those addressed by doctors. It's not something that brain retraining can just fix. Maybe you have some inflammation or different things in the blood cells, right? You have to go down the medical route with that first And when they don't have any more solutions for you, that's where something like brain retraining and the things I teach on this channel can work. But the most important part, make sure to get everything else ruled out, deal with it first through the medical system with the doctors. And once they clear you of everything and they say, okay, we've done all we can, now it's just going to take time for your nervous system to get back to normal, that's when the principles I teach in this channel can work. So you absolutely want to get those checked out first.
And we found antibodies stuck to the blood vessels. We knew that they were attacking the blood vessels. I had expected that we would see a lot of virus in the brain because the virus affects the nose. To our surprise, we didn't find the virus in the brain. There are a few people that have reported detection of virus in the brain, but they find very small amounts. And it doesn't explain the pathology that we see.
Most of these autopsies were conducted on individuals who had severe cases of COVID. Less is known about brain damage in those with long COVID, symptoms that persist for weeks after what is often a mild stage of acute infection. Studies estimate that up to 30% of people develop long COVID after an initial SARS-CoV-2 infection, and that women are at greater risk than men. The symptoms can include fast heart rate, shortness of breath, and various neurological issues.
So those symptoms definitely fall under the category of hypersensitive nervous system issue, but those symptoms are so general, that's what makes it kind of confusing to diagnose somebody with chronic fatigue syndrome because, shortness of breath, there's thousands of different things that cause that. Same thing with high heart rate. So with CFS, it's really ruling out a bunch of other things and then coming to the conclusion like, okay, it's chronic fatigue syndrome. But even then, they don't really have a solution for it. But the way my doctor described it to me, different doctors call it different things. Usually it's recognized as severe anxiety, panic disorder, major depression, hypochondria disorder. There's lots of different names for it. The online community kind of recognizes CFS, kind of recognizes that cluster of symptoms as chronic fatigue syndrome. But let's continue watching. These symptoms are sounding very familiar.
We've actually seen over time, now that we've seen hundreds of patients and lots of people have been reported in literature too, there are these kind of major categories. One of them is this, what people call brain fog, where really your brain is just not functioning properly for some sort of cognitive types of tasks, things like concentration, memory. People have skin changes where they basically say, wow, the sensation on the surface of my skin is really abnormal. And then another major category that we've seen is headache. There is the sort of psychiatric categories where people have rarely had a much more acute and profound sort of delusion or psychosis syndrome. I think it's been a real challenge for patients that they come into the doctor with symptoms and the tests that are run are negative. And even things like MRI, which is a very sensitive test that can find lots of changes in the brain, for many of these patients is normal. For a long time,
Let's listen to that again.
Research this syndrome.
We got to listen to that again because this is what almost everybody with CFS experiences. They have a bunch of weird symptoms. They go to doctors, they do a bunch of tests, and the doctors say, well, your tests are fine. So this is sounding very familiar. Let's listen to that again.
A challenge for patients that they come into the doctor with symptoms and the tests that are run are negative. And even things like MRI, which is a very sensitive test that can find lots of changes in the brain, for many of these patients is normal. For a long time.
It's super frustrating because I remember when I clearly was not normal. I was feeling like death. I could barely make it upstairs. Well, could barely get out of bed at my worst, but there were times when I could still kind of function, but it was extremely difficult. And I would go to doctors, the tests would come back normal. So they would just rely on the test and they'd say, you're normal. Drink some more Gatorade, drink some more electrolytes, go home and rest for 3 months and we'll see if you're still tired after 3 months. Meanwhile, I'd been sick for like 3 years and I'm like getting angry because yes, I've been trying to rest for the last few years and I still feel worse. I don't know what's going on. So it can be extremely frustrating. I've been down that route, x-rays, MRIs, CT scans, blood tests, urine tests, hormone tests, cortisol tests, thyroid tests. And I've tried so many different things too, massage, acupuncture, chiro. And it's pretty much like running into a brick wall and it just adds to the frustration, which only adds to the anxiety, which can lead into, more symptoms.
We've been using research tools that can look at more sensitive measures that aren't things that we necessarily use in the clinic, but can tell us things like whether the immune system is functioning completely normally or whether there might be very subtle injury to the neurons in the brain that you just can't see by looking at an MRI scan.
There are 3 hypotheses that can potentially explain how long COVID can affect the brain. One is a direct infection of the virus of some cells in the nervous system or supportive structures in the brain. Second hypothesis is that there is autoimmune responses that are attacking parts of the brain. That could obviously trigger lots of different symptoms and long duration of such responses, because once the autoimmune cells are activated, it's very hard to deactivate them. The third possibility is that there is distal inflammation.
So they've been using the word possibility in a lot of this stuff, which tells me that they still haven't really figured out exactly what's going on, which, they're doing their best. They're doing what they can. So all of these are essentially like all different hypotheses of what's potentially going on. So I guess they haven't actually figured out exactly what's going on or found a cause. These are kind of what is the most probable that is happening based on their experience.
Happening, such as in the lung, that could stimulate cells within the brain and trigger long-term changes in those cells. So a combination of these could be happening, or it could be a sequential event of things that happens, and they all contribute to this brain neurologic issues.
Long COVID clinics across the world are trying different rehabilitation approaches to improve these symptoms.
Our nervous system has a whole portion of it that is dedicated toward doing all of the things that your body needs to autonomously control. When that gets knocked out of balance, that's called dysautonomia. Dysautonomia has also been reported in other cases of post-viral illness.
Dysautonomia is something that people describe quite a bit in CFS. It's essentially an imbalance of the nervous system. And pretty much all the symptoms you're feeling is coming from a form of dysautonomia. Everything I was feeling, it's just an imbalance of the nervous system. You have the sympathetic side and the parasympathetic side, and the ideal scenario is for your body to be able to adapt back and forth based on the changing environments around you, based on what you're ingesting, based on the amount of stress you have. Your body's able to turn up and turn down the tonicity of your nervous system to either move towards parasympathetic, to either move towards sympathetic or parasympathetic. So dysautonomia is a word that I came across quite a bit in my research when I was sick, trying to figure out what was going on with me. It was definitely scary though, because I went down different rabbit holes on Googles and forums. So, it's hard. I tell people, as long as they have gotten all these other illnesses ruled out and they've done a bunch of tests and, they've come back negative, then try to stay away from the forums, try to stay away from Google, and honestly watch my YouTube channel or other channels that show you solutions how to fix this versus some airy-fairy stuff of people saying, oh, you're never going to get better, you're going to have this for the rest of your life. All these tests come back negative from doctors and specialists.
Autonomic rehabilitation is a very personalized and a very delicate approach to rehabilitating the autonomic nervous system. For most people that we see with long COVID, it typically begins with very gentle movements paired with breath work, with a patient laying flat on their back, slowly performing movements that increase blood flow into the chest cavity. It's not exercise, it's not aerobic, it's very gentle. We've had good response to cognitive symptoms from autonomic rehabilitation. I think it's worth mentioning that.
I like the term he uses there, autonomic rehabilitation, and the way he breaks it down, it is not exercise. It's not anything strenuous. It's not aerobic. The goal is not to increase the heart rate and perform exercise with oxygen. That's what aerobic means, with oxygen. We don't want to push the body to those levels, and we want to be very gentle. It's almost like we want to massage the nervous system, slightly stimulate it, but not too much, because it can be very sensitive. When you have something like dysautonomia, even standing up or going for a short walk to the mailbox outside, that can be enough to trigger symptoms depending on where you're at. Obviously, you have to do some movements, and what I see a lot is people become very fearful of the symptoms, which only leads to more anxiety, which only keeps the nervous system turned on, and it tends to get stuck in this hypersensitive state. And so when you have a lot of emotions around these symptoms, the missing piece of the puzzle is people try to rest physically and they work on the physical side of things, but they don't work on the mental and emotional side, the fear that drives a lot of the symptoms, right? The anxiety that increases the heart rate, that causes more palpitations, the anxiety that can cause more headaches and lightheadedness and POTS symptoms. If we go back here, it looks like they were actually doing a POTS tilt table.
And a very delicate.
It looks like it. I don't know exactly what they're doing here because they don't say, but it looks like a POTS tilt table test, which POTS is another main symptom of CFS that's part of the cluster of symptoms. Essentially, every time you try to stand up or change positions or try to go upright, your heart rate tends to go very high. And I used to have that quite a bit. I could not even sit up out of bed without my heart rate jumping from like 90 to 130 or 140. Sometimes even going from my bed into a wheelchair and trying to roll around, it'd be pretty steady at 130. And even when I lied down, the heart rate wouldn't go down. So it was really scary. I thought my heart was just going to give out, but eventually that fixed itself over time as I started to work on fixing the dysautonomia, the hypersensitive nervous system.
Not all cognitive symptoms are from dysautonomia, and so in some cases we don't move the cognitive symptoms at all.
Researchers are also beginning to conceive of drug treatments that may address the underlying causes of long COVID. A team at the National Institutes of Health is awaiting regulatory approval for an immune-modulating drug trial.
The plan is to bring in patients. We're going to keep them in the hospital for a week. And one arm will get placebo. The other arm will get intravenous immunoglobulin. And the third arm will get intravenous corticosteroids. They are sledgehammer approaches. They're not very precise attacks, right?
I mean, at least he's honest about it. He says they're sledgehammer approaches, and he admits that they're not the most accurate.
They affect the immune system in many different.
What concerns me is when he said the corticosteroids. Now, I'm not a doctor, right? I don't know enough about this long COVID and how it affects the cells in the body and all of that stuff. What I do know is that when I had my hypersensitive nervous system issue and I was given hydrocortisone, it caused me to be extremely hyperstimulated to the point where, I didn't sleep for 2 weeks. My heart rate was through the roof. I had panic attack after panic attack. And I don't say this to scare you. I'm just sharing my experience with this. My energy was extremely low, lots of fatigue, lots of brain fog, heart palpitations, whatever they put on your heart to listen to it, put against my chest, said, take a deep breath. Took a deep breath. And every time I took a deep breath and exhaled, my heart would do a triple skip palpitation. It would do that every time. And she was like, take another breath, triple skip again. And she was like, yeah, you're in rough shape. So your adrenals are definitely down. You definitely have adrenal fatigue. And the way to treat that is through hydrocortisone. So she gave me hydrocortisone, and me, of course, I was extremely desperate at that point. And I was like, honestly, whatever you give me, it should help. However, the problem wasn't that my adrenals were incapable of producing the cortisol needed, right? And it wasn't that my adrenals were underperforming. My brain was not sending the proper signals to my adrenals to allow it to produce that, right? The organ itself was capable of doing it. The adrenals are capable. So I was just in a very hypersensitive state that the way I look at it now, looking back and knowing everything I know with how I recovered, my brain was essentially placing a limiter on my body. It did not want my body to produce more energy. It wanted me to stop everything I was doing because I was working at the time. I was trying to work through this. This is early on in my illness. My brain was screaming for me to stop, and it was trying to do everything it could to get me to slow down and really focus on relaxing and getting into a parasympathetic state. So it wasn't trying to give me more energy, but the hydrocortisone was meant to jumpstart my adrenals. That could have been the worst thing to do in that situation because I was already hypersensitive. It's almost like you're stuck in a state where as if someone tried to jumpstart you, and then you're stuck in that first split second when you're being jumpstarted. So now your nervous system is just running wild. And then on top of that, you try to jumpstart it again. And that's what happened to me. Yes, it was not fun. So this just reminded me of that. The corticosteroids didn't really help me. I've heard of it working for other people who actually have adrenal fatigue and other things. But, like you said, they're testing it. They're doing the sledgehammer approach to see if it works. So hopefully the people turn out okay. I mean, ideally, it's a solution for it, right? But it looks like they're testing it right now. But I just wanted to share my experience with corticosteroids.
Ways.
Vaccination in long COVID patients have impact on their symptoms. Some people feel much better from vaccination. That could eliminate the source of these persistent virus or viral remnants or something that's basically persisting in these patients that's triggering the chronic inflammation. Number two, some people don't feel any difference at all, but there are some people who feel worse from vaccination. If a person is suffering from autoimmune disease, for example, the vaccine-induced inflammation might exacerbate the autoreactive lymphocytes and therefore making the disease temporarily course. And the ultimate goal is to try to understand what we can do to help them feel better without using the vaccine, because vaccine doesn't work on everybody. But if we can figure out what triggers the improvement in their symptoms, then we can try to emulate that with other therapies.
Many hope that the knowledge gained from long COVID research will benefit others grappling with post-viral illnesses.
We have millions of people suffering from not only this, but very similar related diseases, post-Lyme syndrome, Gulf War syndrome,
Post-Lyme syndrome. There are a couple people in the program who have had Lyme's in the past, and they're actually slowly starting to get better with these approaches. Because what happens is something will happen in the body that is enough to push it over its stress threshold, right? And I'm just saying this based on my observation. I'm not saying this is the cure for all of this stuff. I'm just sharing what I've seen happen with people, right? Everybody has a certain stress threshold in their body. Most of society today is living in a very stressed state. Lots of social media, lots of stimulus, sleeping late, coffees, energy drink. The pace of life is just so much faster than it used to be. People tend to be in a stress state. So if their maximum stress threshold is here and they're living life at about here, all it takes is something like a virus, something like a bad cold, a bad flu, a stressful event, someone passing away in the family, something tragic happening for the stress levels to go over that threshold. And once you go over that threshold, that's when you start to feel these symptoms. And something like COVID, it's a very big stressor on some people. I know people who got it and they were fine 2 days later. I know other people who got it, and I don't personally know anybody in my life, in my circle of friends and network, who have had long COVID, but I see people online from all over the world experience long COVID. And so COVID can be just enough to push them over that stress threshold and have a symptom flare up. And even when the virus is gone, it kind of leaves you with this feeling as if a bomb went off in your body, and it leaves everything a mess. So then what I see helping people is working on the nervous system, like the aftermath. We're trying to get it functioning normally again, to shift from a constant sympathetic state to a more balanced state where it's able to start to shift into parasympathetic mode.
Patients, they're going from physician to physician. Nobody knows what's wrong with them. People tell them, well, it's all psychological or anything, but they have real disease. Now,
so I saw over 20 doctors and specialists. A lot of people on my channel is like the last resort for them too, because they've seen dozens of doctors, if not, 30 or 40 doctors. There's a couple people in the Recovery Jumpstart program who have seen over 40 doctors. And to me, that is mind-blowing. And I can't even imagine the level of frustration to see 40 doctors and them tell you're completely, after all those blood tests, the scans, you're entrusting your lives with them. And it's not necessarily their fault. Like, they don't know what's going on, because the nervous system is just, it's so tricky, right? I got lucky because I met a doctor who understood all of this based on his experience of working with people. It's very rare to find a doctor like that. So I feel like it's my obligation to get all the information on my channel out to people who need it, who are not necessarily getting this information from their doctors.
now we have a superb opportunity to put the best tools that we have available to us, try and sort this out. If we could do that, I think you'd have a huge impact in the field.
Okay, so all in all, powerful video. What I got from it is there are a lot of crossovers and similarities between long COVID and a lot of CFS symptoms. Does not prove anything wrong or right. There's just a lot of similarities. And based on what I've seen, a lot of people with long COVID commenting on this channel, and there's a couple of people in the program who have had long COVID and who have actually picked up COVID in the program. And the people who picked up COVID in the program have actually come back out of it, and it's as if COVID never hit them, and they pretty much pick up where they left off, because we use a lot of it. And they said that if it wasn't for knowing this knowledge, they would have spiraled way downhill had they not known this knowledge. Because it's one thing to already have CFS, and then to get COVID on top of that's just another layer of added stress that hits the nervous system hard. But the principles of recovery are the same. The whole purpose of this channel is to teach people how to fix their hypersensitive nervous system issue. And what it sounds like from this video, it definitely shows a lot of symptoms of a hypersensitive nervous system issue. Of course, I always tell people, even if they don't have COVID, is go get everything checked out first. Get everything ruled out. And if nothing is showing up on your tests and doctors can't explain what's going on and they don't have a solution, then that's when you should come to my channel and start watching all these videos and seeing if it applies to your situation. If it resonates with you, then take it, use it, implement it. If not, then that's fine. All this information is here to help you And I do it because I genuinely want to have the impact that my doctor had on me. You know, you pretty much saved my life. I don't know where I would be if I didn't learn the information. So I hope you got some value out of this. This was a different kind of video for this channel. You know, most of my videos, me talking straight into the camera. It's not really a voiceover. It's not really watching a video and doing a commentary, but this was an interesting one to do. If you have any other videos you want me to check out, you know, maybe we could do something like this again. Comment down below what's your biggest takeaway from this video. If you did enjoy this content, if you got something out of it, let me know. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell. We release videos every single day. A lot of things to just help you keep the train on the rails in your recovery journey. But other than that, always remember that you are a thriver and you are just one mind shift away from living a life with thriving health. See you in the next video.